The default member is also not unique to a parent-child hierarchy and is not necessarily more commonly used with this type of hierarchy than any other, but we see a warning on the parent-child hierarchy if we don't have a default member defined. First, let's take a look at how the default member works in general. When we include an attribute on rows, or on columns, or in the filter, which is the where clause if we're writing an MDX query, Analysis Services ignores the default member for that attribute. Normally, if we don't have a default member, Analysis Services uses the all member from the hierarchy. So if an attribute like account type is not placed on rows, columns, or a filter, then the all member is used by default. Even if it's not configured as such, it's the default member for that attribute, and it affects the values that display in the grid. In other words, when we don't see account type on rows, columns, or filters, we know that the value represents all account types. That is, we know values include assets, liabilities, and so on. Similarly, we're using the all member for the dates attribute and not filtering for a particular date. And we have the default member for month, the all member, and the all member for quarter. On the other hand, scenario, even though it's not a parent-child dimension, it's been configured not to aggregate its members at the top level. In other words, the isAggregatable property is set to false. Furthermore, it has a default member, actual. Now you can't see it in the Cube browser, but if you add scenario to the filter in the Cube browser, you would see that actual is set automatically as the filter. Incidentally, that's just one way to check the default member of each attribute. Now in the case of the accounts attribute, when we remove the all member by setting the isAggregatable property to false, and we don't have a default member defined, and we don't include the attribute on rows, columns, or filters, Analysis Services uses the first member in the top level, which is balance sheet in this case, which shows up as a bunch of zeros. Now for each attribute, whether or not it's a parent-child hierarchy, we can set a default member by navigating the tree view and selecting a specific member when we want to ensure the user sees a specific value if they don't explicitly set a hierarchy on rows or columns.